What's up, guys? Today we're taking a break from our normally scheduled programming to show you something different, which is a live video we made in our Philosopher Reacts format in front of a kind of live audience here in our studio during our holiday fundraiser stream a couple weeks ago. So check it out. I hope you like it. Let us know what you think, and I'll see you next year.
On a recent edition of the Anything Better podcast, comedians Bill Burr and Paul Verzi echoed the same sentiments we and the rest of the American public have been feeling since the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
What is more heartless than a CEO of a corporation? The decision in healthcare, the decisions that they make, I'm not saying what happened should have happened, but I'm just, for them to be like, oh, this is like, why would anybody want to do this? It's like, they're denying claims and people are dying. The food supply is poison. The motive out there is wild.
Burr hits the nail on the head. While we and Burr are not condoning this act of violence, nor do we think that violence is a real solution to the systemic problems underlying violent actions, you are denying reality if you can't understand and acknowledge why this story resonates so.
Is there a lot more there, or should we talk about what Bill Burr said thus far? I think it has to do with like how we struggle to conceptualize violence that isn't immediate. When violence is like individual to individual, we find it so viscerally upsetting. But when violence is systemic, it's something that we, I don't know, are easier to not be morally disgusted by. And I think there's like an explanation you can get out there, which is sort of like classical liberalism, right? Because what is like the big moral shift you get in liberalism other than this post-Enlightenment idea, rather than the collective good being the thing that matters, individual rights and goods are what are most important. You end up with the system where if individual rights and individual responsibilities are the most important moral thing, then acts done between individuals are going to be the most heinous acts, and things done in the ways that CEOs and healthcare companies do them, where violence is done and people die and people get sick via the trickle down decisions that lead to death. Well, that doesn't bother us because it's not like a person who did it. And I guess it's the same way in which like we're not as disgusted by sort of state violence as we are with an individual doing something. And I think that in many ways, this is indicative of like a shift, kind of like an Enlightenment, modern political philosophy shift from thinking of the good in terms of the good of the collective, the good of the whole, the good of the city, the good of a people. And on the other hand, shifting things more towards individualism. That's my thought there, Lux.
Wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people a shield to be mean and cruel, armored in false virtue.
There's like a baby talking.
The world has become too absurd to be satirized.
PragerU, let's go.
The great English writer G.K. Chesterton said that way back in 1911, long before math was considered racist and biological men were allowed to compete against women in sports. Racist? One can only imagine what he would say if he were alive today.
Who has ever said that?
At the Babylon Bee, where we write satire for a living, we're feeling Chesterton's pain in a big way.
You don't write satire.
Just look at these headlines that were satirical at the time we wrote them. 2 + 2 = 4, insists close-minded bigot. That was a joke, of course. But on August 10th, 2020, the Washington Examiner published this story. Math professor claims equation 2 + 2 = 4 reeks of white supremacist patriarchy.
Who knows the source of that article and who knows like how they said it? And there's totally a way that I could see someone arguing that like math or science, whatever, has its roots in a form of white supremacy, but they just find like the one random thing and use that as a way to indict all of liberal / woke culture. I would, if anyone in the chat wants to look up that article right now and let us know, you would be doing the Lord's work. Washington Examiner. Go ahead.
BLM rioters awarded Nobel Peace Prize. At the time, we thought this was obvious satire, but on January 29th, 2021, this story was published in The Guardian. Black Lives Matter movement nominated for Nobel Peace Prize.
Okay, we can pause again. That's just insane. God, these people are the worst. So their joke initially, BLM rioters awarded Nobel Peace Prize. So I guess the gist of their joke, yeah, there's no joke here. For them, they associate Black Lives Matter rioters, again, with some sort of illegal activity, some anti-state activity. There's, of course, an underlying racist tone to all of this. and that being nominated for a Peace Prize. I mean, think about how many activist groups have been nominated for Nobel Peace Prizes. Did Nelson Mandela win a Nobel Peace Prize? The guy kind of ran a liberation party in army and was put in jail. Was considered a terrorist by America, and he did it okay. I mean, wouldn't the better joke here be like, President awarded Nobel Peace Prize for drone bombing or something? I feel like that would be a much better joke that you could make that they didn't want to make. I'm so curious about the brain that sees these two things and sees a joke on the one hand and then sees some sort of problem on the other. And, you know, we did a video about this at one point, not to be self-referential, but it was on protest movements. And like, if you go back and look at how the media and the American public reacted to and wrote about like MLK, it's wild. So yeah, these guys suck.
On March 25th, 2020, we ran this headline: Pants sales plummet as everyone working from home. The very next day, this story appeared in Yahoo Finance. Amid coronavirus, Walmart says it's seeing increased sales of tops, but not bottoms. I could go on.
How is that funny?
Our satirical headlines are proving to be prophetic with astonishing regularity. So what does this mean for humor and satire?
Please tell me.
Well, for one thing, it makes our job much more difficult. You might be surprised to hear that. The crazier reality is, the easier it is to make fun of, right? Actually, it's the opposite.
Is the point of this video that
satire exaggerates the truth to make a point. But when reality is this absurd and extreme views and behavior are commonplace, how do you go a step beyond it? Almost anything we publish now ends up being believable.
Well, can we
and much of it ends up actually coming true.
Again, the point of satire or comedic irony isn't just to be like, people of a race I don't like are dumb, or hey, protesters are bad, or hey, people that work from home are lazy. The point is to use humor as a mechanism to point out some underlying truth or incongruity in society that we're not seeing. Like earlier today, if anyone was watching, we were talking to Esteban Gast, a comedian that works with Yellow Dot, and he was making the point that climate humor can be useful to sort of upset the way we normally think about the stuff, make people think differently. And I just don't, any of the examples they've shown, I cannot see ways that you could argue that those jokes are exemplary of satire. I think if his life depended on giving a coherent understanding of satire, like what it is and what it does, I don't think he could do it. Because I think their whole point is like making fun of stuff that happens, saying people we don't like are dumb. And just the underlying logic of this video that like Babylon Bee are the real victims because it's hard to do satire. No, it's hard to do satire if you're operating from that dumb of a position.
This is exactly what Chesterton was talking about. It's one of the ways the left is killing satire, by turning reality into a parody of itself. There's another, more intentional and insidious way
we have the Idiocracy administration, but
and that's through censorship. We published an article a couple of years ago with this over-the-top headline.
Over the top.
CNN purchases industrial-sized washing machine to spin news before publication. Believe it or not, Snopes fact-checked this story. I mean, come on, a washing machine to spin the news? That's an obvious joke. But Snopes fact-checked it and rated it false, as if we'd written a serious story.
Wow.
It used to be that jokes were either funny or not. They made you laugh, or they didn't.
What a dumb
But now in the fact-checking age, we're giving them a truth rating. Jokes are no longer funny. They're false. And false information is dangerous.
Sure, let's pause again.
In response to Snopes
his
fact-check,
example is like, they did a stupid article with a joke that made no sense. Snopes fact-checked it, but who knows how much of their process is like automated or whatever anyways. And somehow that proves some theory of comedy by which now something's only funny if it's true or false. I don't think the Snopes fact-check was saying this isn't funny. It was saying that thing didn't happen. But again, like, to use that as your mechanism for saying that like people, I mean, it's just that thing where like, but I think there's a thing many of us have done before where we like make a joke when we're younger that you get older and you're just like, oh, that was kind of sexist, that was kind of racist, that was kind of homophobic, whatever your poison was. And but when you're younger, no, you just don't get it. You just don't get it. You don't understand my humor. Like anytime a funny person or a person thinks they're funny tells you like you don't just get their humor. They're just mad that you didn't tacitly endorse their racism. Let's keep cooking.
Facebook warned us that we'd be demonetized and deplatformed if we continued publishing fake news. It should go without saying that there's a big difference between fake news, which is meant to deceive, and satire, which is meant to entertain and inform through mockery, humor, and irony.
Mockery, interesting.
But the left benefits by blurring this distinction. If they can successfully lump us in with fake news, then they can shut us down.
We should make a documentary
it's that simple.
Called What is the Left?
These fact checks,
what is the
which often
thing,
smear us by suggesting we're purposefully misleading people, are nothing more than a creative, conniving way of justifying censorship.
What is the left, though?
But why would anyone want to censor satire?
Yeah.
Why is Facebook paying USA Today to write lengthy refutations of our jokes? Yes, they actually do that. Because humor is ultimately a vehicle for truth delivery, and the truth can be offensive. Think about all the things you're not allowed to say anymore. Not because they're false, but because they make people uncomfortable.
But everything, all their
Satire
examples
cuts
end up
right
just
through
being
the
racism or
pretense and
sexism or
political correctness
transphobia.
to expose uncomfortable truths, and it does so more
want an
ruthlessly
example of
and
an uncomfortable
effectively than
truth.
anything else.
Give me a truth.
C.S. Lewis said, "Good philosophy must exist if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered."
Okay, pause. This is insane.
Satire is necessary for the same reason.
This is insane. This man is using a C.S. Lewis quote. C.S. Lewis kind of mid, but whatever. Wrote a good book when his wife died. Shouts to him and her. Good philosophy exists if for no other reason bad philosophy needs to be answered. So the implication here is that the Dylan Babylon Bee guy is here to give us the philosophical comedy that the liberals don't want us to have. I mean, relevant to how we started this little session today. And I'm not even the biggest Bill Burr head, but Bill Burr's random comments about off the cuff about that CEO shooting had way more juice to them than anything we're getting from these guys. I can't believe it. And it's just funny too, if you're talking about like comedy in a contemporary context, you're just like, a bunch of Catholic thinkers who have been dead for 100 years said this. Okay, not 100 years. Chesterton maybe 100 years. Lewis not. I guess we can keep going. That one, I just had to yell at that.
Satire ridicules bad ideas. And now, more than ever, bad ideas need to be exposed for what they are before they gain an even bigger foothold on our minds and hearts.
Tell me 3 bad ideas.
Especially on the minds and hearts of young people.
Why do you like kids so much?
And while good philosophy and rational argumentation are indispensable, it's often humor that's most effective. To quote our friend G.K. Chesterton once more, humor can get in under the door, while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. I'm Seth Dillon, CEO of the Babylon Bee for Prager University.
You know that someone understands comedy, philosophy, and rationality when they talk about being the CEO of Babylon Bee at Prager University. Oh my God. That's tough. That was tough.
The Crusade had a few main aims: to unite the disparate surviving strands of humanity, by force if necessary, to kill all Xenos found so that humanity has no competition, to impose the imperial truth, a secular denial of all religion. But at this point, there's already a spanner in the works. Arguably, the plan had been for the Primarchs and the Legions to lead this crusade, while the Emperor worked on another big project, breaking into the Webway. The Webway is a subspace network of transit tunnels in between real space and the warp, built by an ancient alien race.
I'm on drugs now.
If humanity could use the Webway, then it wouldn't have to rely on the warp for interstellar travel. By the 41st millennium, the Imperium is a galaxy-spanning, authoritarian, fascist, religious fundamentalist, oppressive state, fighting to stay together against the threats of chaos and various Xenos species. It encompasses worlds so remote and backwards that they largely exist as medieval farming communities whose only contact with the Imperium proper is a tithe of soldiers every few decades, and teeming hive worlds with populations in the billions where everyone's a factory drone. The Imperium has no particular opinion on what form of government or social structure a planet might have, which means a lot of planets are ruled by autocrats, dictators, or a sort of noble caste.
Let us know what you're thinking here, because I see where you're going. I'm curious what you think, man.
What we're getting at here is the collapse of a society that had banned all religion.
Yeah.
And it was a hyper-secularized society to the construction of a hyper-religious, like, crypto-fascist society.
Yeah.
It was fascist the whole time. But before it was like fascist and God's not real. And now it's fascist and God's like super real.
I mean, this is very like futuristic God's not dead stuff. That's what they imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Although it is interesting. I mean, I think like someone in the chat had said earlier the thing about how we're naturally religious because of a draw towards narrativization or meta-narratives. And I think there's something to that, but I don't think it's connected to religion. But that's like an interesting thing to imagine, a world where religion and the constructions of like foundational narratives is outlawed. I could see it driving people towards some goofy stuff.
Basically what happens, we skipped this part, but I can do it fast when this guy did, is that one of the special magical super space soldier generals turns evil and turns some of the other ones evil, and they do a revolution. And in doing so, they almost kill the emperor. So he's like almost dead. And the only way to keep him alive is to sacrifice 10,000 psychic people every day.
Jesus Christ.
But he needs to stay alive, or else demons will come from outside of outer space and kill everyone. And so because they're constantly sacrificing people to the emperor, he becomes basically a god, right, in terms of the sociological construction. And then society reorganizes itself around the idea that there is a guy who's literally God, and he sits in a giant chair, and he's basically a skeleton in the Himalayas. And then it becomes this. And I think that's the part we're getting to now, is what that looks like.
Any knowledge of chaos or the Horus Heresy is ruthlessly suppressed, and most people have no idea of anything in history beyond the propaganda they consume. The vast majority of humans never leave their home planet. The Emperor has been a catatonic husk for 10,000 years, but psychers are still hunted down and returned to Terra, where they're sacrificed to fuel the Emperor's golden throne, or to power a giant navigational beacon called the Astronomicon. The lucky ones might become astro-telepaths, the only reliable way of communicating between star systems. Harboring psychers, dealing with Xenos, or contact with chaos are considered capital crimes, and if a planet is deemed too far gone, then it might suffer the fate of exterminatus, scoured clean of life, just as a precaution. The colossal, inefficient bureaucracy of the Imperium is intended
in a room where like his wife and kids are like waiting for dinner, and she's like, "Dad will be done with this video." And I say this as like a nerdy guy that is often in my room, like talking to a computer, as I'm like, you know, honey, stop talking. My internet friends might hear you, but I can't help but enjoy that part of it. Okay, do you think there's more we should do?
I want to see. I think
I'm lost in the sauce here.
Yeah,
I am covered in the sauce.
I want to see if he gets to. I want to see if he gets to explaining the Emperor's role and all this really quick. It's only 2 minutes left, so I'll cut it if we goes a little long. But I'll play a little more of it, then I'm going to go do another PragerU for you.
Oh wow.
we can wash the taste of this out some PragerU.
It's not a fun place to live, and it's against this background that almost all of modern 40k is set. That's the world that Xenos is set in, and the world that the 40k stories have been written in for 30 years now. It's so huge and expansive that many authors have cut out their own little sectors to concentrate on. Abnett's Eisenhorn stories and the sequels to those happen in just one subsector of the Imperium. Recently, Games Workshop decided to actually move the plot forward, the first time they've done that since the 80s. The planet's holding...
Yeah, so that's that. I just want to get your thoughts.
My mind's broken.
So this is I think compares pretty well with the PragerU thing we just watched. I want to get your thoughts on this, because this is like actual satire. This game was originally made explicitly by British leftists to make fun of Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, so Margaret Thatcher's like an evil old space demon.
She was the evil dying old person on the throne that everyone's being sacrificed for.
Okay, that makes more sense now. That makes more sense.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of wondering, like, trying to get your quick thoughts on like this kind of satire as opposed to the sort of straight up comedy satire.
Is the thing you're getting at here the idea that not all satire is comedic satire? And there's, because I think that's interesting, the way that like you could satirically look at someone as horrendous as Margaret Thatcher via that model. I mean, that's cool. Like, I think it's a thing where like until you told me that, I didn't get it, but that's very cool. Now it like retroactively makes sense of a bunch of the other stuff there. That's fun.
Redden says I should have started with that, but the reason I didn't start with that is because I wanted to see how Burns would react to a totally blind exposure to this thing. Which was pretty funny.
Feeling like I got aggressively dosed and thrown into like a sensory deprivation tank.
You guys have to understand, I've been sitting behind this computer, watching Burns for now,
horrible.
If we count yesterday also, about 16 hours.
Horrible.
And I need a little bit of stuff for me. Now I'm going to bring you back to some more PragerU where I know you're more comfortable.
That sounds bad. Like you're more comfortable in sort of American Christian nationalist content.
I mean, the Americans who are exactly the same as the evil empire.
Yeah.
They used to have this word race, class, and gender. That was their gender. Have you noticed they got rid of the class?
Jacket.
And they got rid of the class because
that's mean of me to say. It's a kind of
America was too upwardly mobile or fluid. You and I could be in a particular class, but we could either not be in that class or our children are not given the birthright. So they never had a permanent European peasantry. They started to gravitate with open borders and the traditional black-white dichotomy, but especially now with Hispanic, and they said, we have a new victim. And the DEI woke, permanent, whatever you want to call it, says anybody who is not so-called white fits into the cultural Marxist paradigm. Victim, victimizer. Oppressed, oppressed.
Well, you can pause real quick. It's just that was like boring and stupid. I mean, they keep doing this where like cultural Marxism for these people always means a dichotomy between oppressed and oppressor or whatever it might be, which is funny as well because as a dialectical thinker, you know, Marx being grounded and Hegel being grounded in the dialectical tradition, the whole point of a dialectic isn't that it's just like two things and you're like, oh, it's got these two things, can't go anywhere because they're blocking each other. That looks weird. But it's the tension between the two things creates something else or creates something new. It's like a productive tension. So like the way to think about, you know, stuff like this in a properly Marxist or dialectical framework would be that there's like societal contradictions that lead to new modes of existence that transcend that previous thing. They're often produced by material and historical conditions, but the sort of language that the Prager folks use, just in the same way they don't understand like satire, they don't understand what the left is. And whenever they say Marxist, it means almost nothing. And here what it basically means is like, we're old white people and everyone used to think we were good, even though they didn't. And now people think we're bad and we don't like that because we are the good guys. We are the supermen and mensch of history. There's like narratives that exist now in which we might not be those guys. It makes me think of it's like the second chapter of the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book. He talks about going to South Carolina where a school board is trying to ban one of his books, his book Between the World and Me. And one of the reasons the school board in South Carolina wants to ban it is because like it introduced narratives of race and racism that made some of the white people feel bad. And white kids be like, ooh, maybe my ancestors did some bad stuff. And rather than reckoning with the fact that history is really messy and that there's systems in place that have been, you know, overtly racist and exploitative and colonist and all those sorts of things, we just like shut our eyes to it. But shouts to this guy. Also, I know that it's probably berries, but from this angle, it looks like they're sitting with a bunch of black beans in between them in the table. And I'm imagining them drinking coffee and eating black beans and taking ginormous shits in the PragerU bathroom that's definitely gender neutral.
Very successful because it flew in the face of all traditional criteria of oppression. So all of a sudden, Professor Kendi is a victim. Oprah is a victim. Oprah says she went into a Swiss store and somebody didn't give her a lizard purse and she's suddenly a victim. LeBron James is a victim. Michelle Obama was at a Target and she lifted up, tried to get a package that somebody requested. She's a victim. And so what they did was they bifurcated the United States into 67% or whatever they call of oppressors, and the rest 33% of oppressed. And then they made this colonialist or anti-colonialist argument. And you have what you have because of your race and privilege and oppression. It's anti-empirical. And you say to them, okay, there's a guy in Bakersfield, he's never gone to high school. His son's on a forklift. They have no privilege at all. You tell me, well, he's white. He's white. And so that was a really pernicious, and that came in.
It's sort of like, what is the left? What is satire? What is they? Everything he says so far is, you say to them and they say that weird thing about Michelle Obama. Is that a real thing anyone's heard of? Or someone in the chat knows about the story of Michelle Obama getting microaggressed at Target? Well, like, I don't know, guys. Any person I've ever talked to in life who has any sort of vaguely left analysis, if you told me about the made-up kid who doesn't exist in Bakersfield, this guy's imagining, and if shit sucked for him, I would be like, oh yeah, shit probably does suck, and you can't find a good job, and there's a bunch of explainable reasons for that, and it's not because, like, you're white, and it's not because you're not, like, you don't deserve to not be in a better position because of your race or whatever. There's like economic conditions that explain this sort of stuff. Neoliberalism fucked a lot of jobs in industries such that it's hard to get them. Like there's just no economic analysis here. The irony being that everything they're saying, he used the term neo-Marxism or whatever earlier on. And then all he's giving is these weird epiphenomenal, superstructural, cultural arguments with no economic, historical, or material basis, which would actually explain that. So when he uses these dumb examples about forklift boy in Bakersfield, completely obfuscates an actual argument that could be made. And this is the thing, we talked about this in the video on what's the guy's name? Curtis Yarvin and JD Vance we were talking about earlier. Like they make all these wild economic and political arguments that just ignore economics, which is nuts. Do we want to watch more of this hot couple?
Really, with Barack Obama, there was a word was not in white currency, diversity, and suddenly he took that word, and that was diversity.
Diversity wasn't a word until Obama.
I was teaching, and I would go, and I heard there were people that I had known my entire lives in my community and at Cal State or Stanford, and they were from India, and they were Sikhs, and they came with enormous amounts of money. I knew people from Korea that came, and all of a sudden they were telling me they were victims. Yeah. I didn't know, Victor, that this place was so racist. I said, well, can you show me what happened? You own 5,000 acres. You're a multimillionaire. Well, I don't, but my daughter came home and told, and that's where we are now.
Made up
we're
people.
Cultural Marxism that's bifurcated. There's no middle class, we say, and everybody is trying to find a gimmick or a lever. So when you reward that, then everybody comes out of the woodwork, whether it's Elizabeth Warren trying to create an identity of a victim, or I just saw the other day Buffy St. Marie, a folk singer that I always thought was Native American. We find out she wasn't. She's Italian.
Because every example is women.
And it's this fixation in our society on race, and it permeates everything.
So like a sense of this too is basically like, if you're from a country that's experienced large-scale colonization, oppression, whatever, if you make money, it's okay and it doesn't count. And clearly when he brought up like LeBron James or Michelle Obama, he's saying like transatlantic slave trade, yada, 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 doesn't matter because, Michelle Obama. Or the example of like, I have students from countries that tell me that there's systemic issues there. These people may or may not exist. But it's like they won't do deeper economic analysis that would explain things like class antagonism, but then they'll use money as a metric just to say like, you can't complain that things are bad because you have access to wealth. And as an inheritor of a large fortune, this affects me personally. That's not true. I've not inherited any large fortune. Okay, guys, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had as much fun watching that as we did making it. Have a great new year, and we'll see you with new videos in 2025.